This is Spirit in Motion.
What do you do during the day?
Well, I woke up this morning at 6, not intentionally. Heather had the alarm set, and I didn't know she had it set, so I woke up. I worked out, which is not normal, and that was good.
But at what point did you have a verbal conversation with God as a pastor? You know?
No, it didn't.
Oh, that doesn't happen.
Doesn't, or just didn't today.
Okay. Has it happened before?
What do you mean, had a verbal conversation with God?
Like he talked to you verbally.
Oh, as in me, as I was driving down the road and the Lord said to me, Whit, you keep heading the direction you're heading, I'm going to take my hand of favor off your life.
It was a correction.
I said, no, I don't know. That doesn't happen to me.
I was expecting something positive for us.
My son.
Yeah. We're going to talk about you growing up at church at all?
Oh, we are starting.
We are starting. You grew up in the church.
Yeah.
Like just super Bible Belt.
Yeah.
PK.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What's it like growing up with your dad being the pastor of a mega church?
I get asked that question a lot, especially when I was younger, because my dad had the Gospel Bill show and a lot of other things that he did, and he was somewhat known.
Yeah. Gospel Bill show was like a super popular Christian show for kids.
I don't know what constitutes super popular, but I assume
easily one of the most popular.
Okay.
In the late 80s.
I don't know. We weren't getting rating sheets or any of that, but so I don't know. But I mean, there's a lot of people that watched it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I used to get that. What is it like having Gospel Bill as a dad or whatever? And I didn't know anything different. So to me, it felt, just really normal. And we didn't think of ourselves as famous, and we didn't think of my dad as famous, and to whatever degree fame is these days or whatever. I never thought, oh, there's all these people that, you're somewhat aware that people listen to your dad or whatever. But it was really a non-thing in our house. Dad was dad, and we were the kids. It was what it was.
There's a lot of stuff, though, because he started a ministry
right
in his 20s. That's where the Gospel Bill show came out of. And then built a camp.
Mm-hmm.
And then he started a church in 87.
Right.
So you had to go to that church.
Yeah, I remember the first Sunday to some degree, like vaguely.
You were how old?
I don't have great memory. Like my memory is not great. I could say not that I don't have great memories. A lot of darkness down there. No,
we'll talk about that in a minute.
No, I have. I just don't have a great memory. But I do remember a little of that first day. It was in Marriott Hotel or whatever. I didn't know what to think. I was 11.
Mm-hmm.
I probably was critical somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been better. Observing the children's ministry and having grown up with all of that. My dad and I would have thought, oh, we could do this and we could do this. I was a good church kid. I liked the church.
You did like it.
I enjoyed growing up in the church. I didn't think, there was nothing about my life that I thought, oh gosh, this is so. I wasn't all angsty.
Mm-hmm.
I was fine with it.
Is it just because it's all you knew?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm probably generally I was about to say I'm generally a easygoing person, but that's not true.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't concur.
No, I don't know. I just kind of thought all was right in the world. It seemed good to me, and probably like I was comfortable with the notions of right and wrong, and light and darkness, and good and evil, and all of that. And it just so it was a fairly simple world, and it made sense to me.
You grew up in Tulsa. That's where we live,
mm-hmm.
and I mean it's church town. There's a reason.
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them, and a lot of people who say they're a Christian.
Right.
A lot of people would say they go to church.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do go to church. And so do you think that had anything to do with it? Like this is kind of the community we live in, that it's kind of odd if you don't go to church.
Yep. And I'm much more aware of that now. At the time, the only people that I was around were church people, and then, anybody that I went to school with. And of course I went to Christian school. And so they were all church people, at least to my mind as well. And, or they feigned some kind of faith and then lived, whatever way. And those are the people that you didn't associate with. They were the bad people. So you don't have much to do with them. Not that I'm, well, maybe there's a little bit of pridefully looking down on them, probably was, but yeah, I just avoided those kinds of people because those were the kinds of people I was supposed to avoid, so that's how I grew up.
Because they were doing what?
Oh, yeah, the bad things.
Yeah.
Smoking, drinking. I don't know that they were cussing,
Yes.
anything that was outside
Probably
of
if they weren't going to church, they were definitely doing those things.
Yeah, oh yeah,
was
for
kind
sure.
of kind of what it felt like.
Yeah, that was definitely how I grew up. Yeah.
Listening to secular music.
Yes, music that was not Christian.
Right.
Yeah, or devil, music or whatever you could, my parents weren't big into that kind of thing. They didn't constantly, hit me about devil music and devil worship or any of that. You certainly were aware of some of those things, and you'd hear some of that stuff talked about in the church from time to time. There are all these urban legends of people throwing away their secular music, their Ozzy Osbourne and their whatnot, and sounds coming out of the, the fire and the flames, like demon sounds and all this kind of stuff. It was just probably just, plastic melting. One. You never did?
No.
Oh yeah, you'd hear that all the time. I had all these old Eagles records and I burned them. And I heard, clear as a bell, I heard the voice of Legion come right out of that thing, and he's, whatever. You heard that stuff.
Yeah.
And you'd heard, and it was that kind of time, I think, the 70s and 80s, and people were coming out of, the boomer generation is hitting their 20s and 30s and having these come to Jesus type moments and walking away from, whatever happened in the 60s and 70s, and so there probably
and
was
that was
kind
of your dad's story too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
He played in bands, and is that the Jesus movement that he?
My dad had a really abusive upbringing, parents separated, mom addict, that kind of thing, and just a really difficult upbringing. And so he comes out of that whole world, or comes to Christ, let's say, in the middle of all of that. And it's just a radical salvation, total change of life, 180 kind of thing, and ends up moving in with his uncle who's a pastor, and just launches right into ministry. And because he's got such a fire and passion, and honestly a lot of raw leadership talent and gift, that's just immediately his world. Yeah, I don't know. I think there was a, the Jesus movement was certainly a part of that time, and there's a lot of people in the baby boomer generation that came out of that time, and that was their moment to come to Christ and to come to faith. And so my dad was one of those.
So he starts a church, and it does well.
Yeah,
pretty early on.
Yeah.
I mean, within a few years, it's a few thousand.
Yeah.
And so you're in it, and you and I, we grew up really similarly. In fact, in the late 80s, my father worked for your dad,
right,
during the Gospel Bell show, and then we moved down to Louisiana, and my dad planted a church, and we stayed connected through that. And it was a different experience than the normal, like church on the weekend we've talked about this a lot. It was a different experience than what was happening during the week. And you even went to a Christian school, but how was going to church affecting like the rest of your life?
Well, I mean, for me, I wouldn't say we were living like a duplicitous life in any way, that there was some, representation of who we are on the weekend. And then when we got home, it was some completely different wild thing. There was none of that. But when it came to deeply penetrating my heart and the way that I, was treating other people, or even thinking about myself, that wasn't happening as much. I was more interested in gaining knowledge about interesting biblical facts, or, some useful technique for prayer or hearing God or something like this.
If I need something,
yeah, a lot less of allowing God to. And some of this is just youthful. When you're young, you're kind of oblivious to a lot of things. I mean, I have 5 kids, and that's, I watch this happen in my own home. So it's not a failure of parenting, or even necessarily a product of the age, although some of it is that. It's, a sort of surface level belief without really penetrating down into the depth of the way that I was living. And I find that that's a fairly common thing. And, I ride motorcycles. And so there's this saying in motorcycle riding, because motorcycle riding is inherently dangerous. You have to be careful. And so I think about, wanting to ride as safely as I can. And that means getting better at riding, which means sort of actively deconstructing the way that you do things so that you can do them the right way, because just the natural way that you ride initially is likely not going to be good. And so there's this saying I think is really great. Some people have been riding motorcycles for 30 years, but they don't have 30 years of experience. They have 1 year of experience repeated 30 times. And I think that's a great descriptor of what happens in Christianity. I think a lot of people have a little bit of Christian experience repeated over and over and over and over again, because, the process of discipleship, of really following Jesus, is a bit like what I'm talking about with this motorcycle riding, which is sort of actively deconstructing. There's a church word for this, which we called surrender.
Yeah.
But it's actively deconstructing yourself and allowing God to then turn and remake you and reshape you. And of course, at that time, when you're, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 17, 18, even all the way up into my early 30s, not a lot of that was happening. There was, for me, more of an increasing knowledge about biblical things, but how much of that was getting through to my heart and how much of it was really affecting me. And for a long time, it was not a lot.
And it feels like the problem is if you're learning a lot about God, it can feel like
you can fool yourself pretty easily. Yeah, you can. These things are all working, and I run into this all the time. Is people who can quote you lots of verses and are always listening to a sermon series, but then you watch the way they treat their friends or their wife or their husband or whatever, and there's this sort of judgmental air about things and passive aggressive. They're not healthy in their relationships, which is ironic because the first commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, that my love for God is expressed in my love for other people. And I'm always fascinated to see, and myself included, how often we're able to kind of disassociate those two things and go, well, I love God and I have all of this over here, but I can't figure out why I'm so short with the people in line at Starbucks or whatever. I'm yelling at people to get out of my way, or I can treat people at a restaurant in a rather dismissive way, or anybody for that matter in the service industry, just I treat them as my servants, whatever at the time. And I'm puzzled by, or people who I have disagreements with, politically or whatever, is it just all of these things. It's like, how do we disassociate those things? But I think that's what happens. I think, I heard Tim Keller say this one time, is that one way to avoid God is by avoiding sin. And that was the way I lived my life for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I didn't do a lot of the bad things. I avoided a lot of those things. But in avoiding them, I avoided the reality of who I was. The reality of what was going on in my heart, the reality of what was happening in my marriage, the reality of what was happening, in my secrets and porn addiction and all these things that were going on. And I didn't really confront any of those things. And the way that I justified that was that I wasn't doing any of the obviously bad things that we talk, at least that I grew up talking a lot about or hearing a lot about whenever I was a kid, which was don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't have sex outside of marriage, don't cuss. These were these very external sins that I could avoid in my own personality pretty easily. I've never been drunk in my whole life, and I've never gotten high. And there's a lot of there's a lot of things I've not done. And so it was easy for me to avoid a lot of that stuff. But in so doing, I was able to avoid reality or confronting the truth about what was the pride, the deceit, the greed, the self-centeredness, all of this that was happening in my heart. I, conveniently could overlook all those things.
What about when you were an older teenager, I guess I don't know exactly what age, but you were a worship leader for a season.
I was.
For our
around 19, 20 years old, somewhere in there for our youth ministry.
For our youth ministry 180. But even during that season.
Oh, yeah. And again, I want to be careful because we have to recognize that, everybody that gets used by God is flawed and none of us are perfect. And it's not like, there was this willful duplicity or double standard that I was allowed to participate or live with because I was the pastor's son. It wasn't that. And even at the time, if you'd asked me, do you love Jesus? The answer would have been absolutely. I'm working at a church. I could cry on Easter. What do you need? And I think those affections were real. I don't think they're fake or put on. I just think they weren't nearly to the depth that they would be. And of course, anybody that walks with God for a long time, that's one of the things that I think you have the opportunity to experience. But what I find over and over with people is that they come to a wall or a place of, will I let God in here? Will I let him have access to this? And we are masters at deceiving ourselves. I think no one can lie to me like I can lie to me. And so I think we have a smokescreen for why why I'm doing all the stuff that I'm doing. Well, I know I was a little bit rude, but here's why and whatever. And I had every excuse all these different reasons for why I was dealing with and battling the things that I was. And in my mind, I was following God and doing the best that I can. And hey, nobody's perfect and all of these things, but I wasn't really being deeply affected by the gospel, by Christ.
So the question is, when did it change, or why did it change?
Why? Yeah. So I remember, 2005-ish, I was at a church conference.
And you would have been how old?
What was I, 30?
Okay.
29, 30. And I remember hearing a pastor preach on idolatry. It was the first time in my life I'd ever heard anybody talk about idolatry. Never had anyone ever talked to me. I was certainly aware just through Old Testament stories and so forth of idol worship. And of course, I had never done that, because who has a little Molech figurine in their home that they bow down to? Only the really weird people. And, I wasn't one of those. So I was aware of the concept of idolatry, or, the historical reality of it from what I understood of the Old Testament. But I had no idea that had any bearing on my life whatsoever. So when he launches into talking about idolatry, I'm thinking, why are we talking about this? Especially at a church conference. I want to hear leadership, teach me how to be a better leader. Teach me how to grow this thing. Teach me whatever, And he starts talking about idolatry. And I realized that we still have a massive problem with idolatry in our world. That while we may not have temples to these, pagan gods like Molech and Dagon and others, that you read about in the Old Testament, we have sports arenas, and we have places where people gather and they make their sort of sacrifice. It's a financial sacrifice to be there. We sacrifice our kids to the gods of sports and all of these things. We give ourselves over to fame and power and sex and lust and all of this. And I'm sitting there going, oh, wow. And I had never in my life understood that those issues were not just, I have a struggle issues, that they were truly at the very core of who am I worshiping issues. That had never been put to me like that before, at least that I had been able to hear. And so that intrigued me. And he happened to mention a pastor named Tim Keller out of New York. I don't even know that he referenced New York. He just mentioned his name. And I kind of seized on that. And I was like, because he'd gotten some of the, the ideas that he was talking about from this pastor. And so I look him up and I find out, he's the pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian. I don't even know what that means at the time. Presbyterian, are these people even Christians? Is that, because we go to a non-denominational church. I don't even know what's going on in New York and who this guy is. I ended up listening to his podcast and start learning this idea and having my eyes open to how religious I actually was, that I had given God all of my actions, but never my heart, really fully my heart. And one of the things that Tim said was just, you not only need to repent of the wrong things you've done, but of the right things you've done for the wrong reasons. And I just had this sense, not all at once, but little by little, that I had given God, so much of my life, but it wasn't really for God. It was for me, that I expected something in return. I was going to give you, my behavior, and in return, you were going to protect me. I was going to give you some prayer and Bible reading, and in return, you're going to bless me. I was going to do the things that you needed so that you were then going to turn around and make my life easier and better and more successful. And it was just sort of vending machine operation, right? I give you what you want, you're going to give me what I want. It was very, exchange oriented. And there's some probably measure of truth in that in just about every relationship, but the best relationships are built on a whole lot more than that. And that was not the case for me. I found God to be useful, just not beautiful. And so it didn't happen, all at once. And I've struggled with that over the years as I've tried to share my story, because I wish I had some moment where I could go, well, then this happened, and, angels started singing, and there was, my eyes were open and I fell to my knees.
That would make for a great story.
It would make for a great story. I couldn't even tell you a date. I have nothing. I couldn't even tell you the year. I just know that little by little, the more I started to think about that, and the more that I understood of that, the more I fell in love with Jesus for real. And the strangest thing started happening is, too, I started changing. And I wasn't the same self-centered, prideful, egotistic person that I had always been. I found myself having more patience with my wife and kids, and being more understanding, and being more empathetic, and all of the things that I lacked before naturally started to happen for me. Not that there's no effort in any of it, but I found myself, let's just say, wanting to do new things. because I saw in Jesus a more beautiful way than the way that I was doing things before. And I thought, well, then I want to be more like that. If that's who you are, then that's how I want to be, because that's so much better than what I've been doing. And that started changing. And I still remember walking to lunch one day. We were parked and we were walking to this restaurant with my wife, and I don't even know what we'd been talking about. I think it was that I'd had some people even at the church come up to me and just say, you're so different than you used to be. And I was telling Heather, I'm like, oh, this is wild. People are saying these things to me. And she goes, well, do you not realize that? And I was like, well, to some degree, yeah, I guess somewhat. She was like, well, you're so different. You don't realize, but you've changed so much in these last, 5-7 years. I don't know how many years it had been at that point. And it was just kind of an epiphany to me, like, oh, wow. I didn't even know that had happened, really, and to the degree that it had happened.
How did it affect your personal struggles?
I would say I still have struggles, and there's things I still am working to overcome. But what I find is just the desire is so much different. Before, it was this white knuckle, try not to, do that thing I'm not supposed to do anymore, whether that's losing my cool or looking at stuff I should look at. Now it's just, it's born more out of a desire to please God, to honor my wife, to love my kids. There's a positive, and this is one of the things I was just telling a group of teenagers this, negative desire is never enough. And a lot of people want to change because they want to get rid of things. I don't want to do that anymore. I need to stop doing this. And that's great. That's a good place to start. In fact, you have to start there, because until you come to a place where you want to do something different, nothing's going to change in your life. But just saying, I can't do that anymore is never going to get you there. It always has to be paired with a positive pursuit. What am I going after? What am I pursuing? And for me, all the things that I was doing that I, wanted to stop doing, that the negative desire was there, but I had no positive pursuit, because what I was pursuing was me and my own satisfaction and fulfillment, which kept leading me back down into, the same issues that I had before. When I started pursuing Jesus fully, those things just kind of melted away because I'm pursuing something else.
What does it mean to pursue Jesus?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it means to make him the object and focus of your life, more than just facts and even more than just admiration. And this is the joy and the struggle of it. It's, what does it mean to pursue a relationship with a spouse? It's I want to know you. I want to spend time with you. And I'm not always great at that. And it does require discipline, and it requires getting quiet, and when I don't want to be quiet, and putting my iPad away when I would rather be messing around online or whatever, sitting down and going, okay, I'm here for you. I want to spend time with you. It's one of the things I talk about reading the Bible is learn to read the Bible, not just for application. We so often go, okay, what am I going to get out of this today? But learn to read the Bible just to be with Jesus. Who am I reading about here? Who's behind these verses? And it doesn't happen immediately, but with practice, you start to get to know someone that way. And it's the same way with God.
The phrase, the real Jesus, is a big deal to you. It's a big part of,
right.
I connect it to you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And where did it come from?
Well, it was born out of my own story. I knew that I had come from this kind of surface level Christianity and not really, and I want to be, again, when I say surface level Christianity, I'm not lumping my family or anybody else at the church in that category. That's not what I'm saying. But my story was that, I was certainly that way. And when I met the real Jesus, the way that I say, instead of this vending machine Jesus that I knew, well, that started to change everything. And the way that was born was we were, sitting at was with some friends, and we were having a dinner and just talking about someone that had this experience, and then someone else that was yet to have it, and, experiencing all these difficult things in their life that really are, a lot of it's of their own making. And so the phrase just kind of came out, oh, they haven't met the real Jesus yet. But the prayer is, and the hope is, yeah, but we want them to. And so it was kind of like, it just kind of stuck after that. It's like, oh, wow, that's a great handle for talking about this experience that I think so many people have yet to have.
You're a pastor now.
Mm-hmm.
About 3 years ago, your father started the transition of turning the leadership and the oversight of the church to you.
Yeah.
How has your real Jesus journey played into that?
Well, I would never have been ready for what I'm doing now. I mean, there's just no way around it. I could have given you, even if you have the capacity to be able to stand up in front of, a couple thousand people and communicate, without that relationship, there's nothing to say. And there's no fire to say it for me. And so the real Jesus experience for me was everything that prepared me to do what I'm doing right now. Without that, I have nothing.
People come up to you all the time, especially people who are new to the faith or to the church, maybe have a background like you. We've seen people come back who you even grew up with and lost their faith and came back. What is like at the core, the thing that you're hoping people will grab onto right at the beginning? Is that this is not a religion, it's a relationship. God desires relationship with you. He desires relationship with me. And that there is life in that relationship. If we're made by a God, then it means that God is the source of life. And so connection to this God then would be life itself. Another way to say it is like ultimate reality. In other words, the deepest, most meaningful thing about existence is that we're connected to this creator God. And so to get closer to him, so to speak, is like to get closer to the source of life and everything good. And, that's what James says, is that every good and perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights. And that's the idea. So as I get closer to God, it's like the sun on a plant. There's growth, there's life, there's energy, there's expansion, and all of these things. And it's really the journey of what it is to be human. It's becoming fully yourself and fully alive and who you were made to be, and all the wonderful things about what that entails. And so when we get people closer to Jesus, it's not just Jesus, I need help with my kids, or Jesus, I need help with my finances, or Jesus, I'm sick. And it's not to say that Jesus doesn't care about any of those things, but the deeper, more fundamental need is the spirit connection, the soul connection, the inward connection to him. That is the animating force for everything that is going to happen in my life. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. Spirit in Motion is a podcast from Church on the Move in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information, you can go to churchonthemove.com. We'll see you next time.